Now we come to a perfect storm of postmodernism plus neoliberalism ends up with third wave feminism. So what happens is, and I have debated many of these younger women, and when I say third wave, I want to make something clear. This is not a generational issue. It is an ideological battle, not a generational one, okay? Absolutely. And I think we need to stop calling ourselves second wave, because that makes us look history and makes us like dinosaurs. We are the future. We are not the past, right? If we are going to save anything from this economic and environmental and economic and cultural collapse, if we are going to do anything as a radical feminist movement around that, we have to start thinking of ourselves as the future and not as the past. And we're going to talk about that. So, now, sorry, can you go back? When I say third wave feminism, I want to make something clear. There was some good stuff that came out of those who call themselves third wave. The analysis around intersectionality and how gender, race, and class intersect was very, very useful for us beginning to think about the ways in which women's race and gender intersect and mediate and shift their class and their gender analysis. Very, very crucial. Right? So I don't want to sort of have this broad brush that it was all awful. But when I'm talking about third wave, I'm talking about feministing, I'm talking about Jezebel, I'm talking about some of Ms. Magazine, all of these. I'm talking about the feminism in the air. And I just want to share something with you, very interesting, that happened to me the first time ever. So just give us a sense of where we're at. You know, for those of us who are teachers and we teach courses in college, I'm sure we all ask the same question of our students day one. How many of you call yourself a feminist? And we all know the answer, like maybe one. Yeah? So then you ask them why. And of course, what answers do you think you get?
Men and women are equal.
Yeah, and why don't they want to call themselves feminists? What? They don't want to hate men, they want to shave under their arms and everywhere else now, but whatever. There's always these reasons, right? But the big thing is I don't want to be a man hater. Different now. You know what my students said to me last semester? And I almost fell out of my chair. I said, why don't you call yourselves feminists? And they said, well, and I swear I am not making this up. They said, well, doesn't feminism mean like you have to fuck every guy? And I don't feel comfortable with that. Isn't that profound? Isn't that profound that the feminism in the air now is that they said, doesn't that mean you just like screw them all and fuck them all? And I don't like, that's not for me, they said. Do you understand what a shift that is? Do you? No, I've never heard that. This is, I am telling you from 25 years of teaching, I have never, and you know what? Because in the air is third wave feminism. And I'm going to explain how we got there. But that is a profound comment, okay? And that turns everything upside down. So let's get into this perfect storm of neoliberalism and postmodernism. So, okay, so we're back to this. So let's think, how do we get to this notion that somebody who wrote, you know, a lot of the third wave stuff comes out with something about this? And to just show how ridiculous it is, let's imagine this. That's next one, Julie. Imagine this. The labour movement is something individual to each worker. Right? Take that for a minute. Take that concept of the labour movement, and let's ask, how then would we have built a labour movement? Well, you know, you might feel oppressed by working for minimum wage, but it works for me. I'm empowered. Right? So we would have no movement. Would you all agree if the labour movement believed that? Okay, let's take this. The civil rights movement is something individual to every person of colour. Right? So how you make it work for yourself is fine. You know, go, see what you can do. So let's just give an example a little bit more of this. Now, the Jim Crow South in America was from the 1876s to 1965. It was the time of official segregation, right? The different water fountains, where you could basically murder African Americans as whites and walk away from it. It was a time post-slavery that for many African Americans said had as much violence in it as the period of slavery, right? So it was a dreadful time. However, even though you had the most incredible level of oppression in the Jim Crow South, what historians found is that black ownership of land during Jim Crow was actually about 15 million acres. So let's take this for a moment and let's say, how can you say the Jim Crow South is oppressive to all blacks? Because some managed to own land. Right? So then it's Martin Luther King could have stood up and said, not I have a dream, which was about a collective movement. He could have stood up and said, I have a discourse, which is individual. Could you imagine a lecture? I have a discourse, and that discourse comes out of my individual dreams. Because what he could argue is, indeed, we have 15 million acres owned by blacks. Doesn't that show you the Jim Crow South doesn't really work? What I'm trying to say here is, even in the face of structural inequality, okay, you can have people who can make it work for them. Systems of oppression are flexible enough to absorb some members of subordinate groups. Indeed, they draw strength from the illusion of neutrality provided by these exceptions. And this is what happens when you make social theory based on the most elite members of your group. You end up with third-wave feminism. Right? Could you imagine, as I say, making a civil rights movement based on the few big landowners in the Jim Crow South? So let's begin to think about how, when you focus specifically on the elite, which is what my feminism was never about, okay? I did not join a feminism that was about making me, my life better, okay? I'm fine, thank you very much, okay? I joined it about something else. So let's talk about this. So again, back to Marx. Let's talk about what this means in terms of choice. Men make their own history, but they do not make it just, and let's forget the men, let's mean women, but they make it as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. You are born into a culture where there are dynamics and systems of oppression in place, which doesn't mean to say for some you can't make it work. But remember that you are not born into a society as a free agent, wandering around the culture, figuring out what's best for you. If you're rich, white, and male, then maybe. But the rest of us who do not look like that, who do not profile like that, have a very different world. So, when we hear about agency, and I have to say, I can't stand the word choice, but agency is getting very close as well. Do you find that? Agency, agency, agency. Okay, so let's do agency, agency, agency. So people always say to me after I finish lecturing, where's women's agency in all of this? So I say, okay, you can ask that question. The answer to that is, it's an empirical question. I'm a sociologist. So my question to you would be, do you mean my agency of an upper middle class, white, highly educated woman? Or do you mean the agency of the women who are going to come in and clean the floors when you're done and gone home? Because you better be very certain which agency you're calling about. Me, I have so much fucking agency, I don't know what to do with it, okay? It's seeping everywhere. But that does not mean that those women who work 2 jobs to put food on the table, who work against everything that this society tells them, they're pieces of shit and they have no right to live. Those women who do that and put food on the table and mother their children and do all of that, it's their agency. That's the feminism I joined, to fight for their agency, not me, right? And what has happened in third wave is that it's all about me, it's all about us, and it's all about those of us with choice, right? So when I'm asked the agency, you say it's an empirical question. We can actually track agency. We can look at the socio-economic realities of that individual woman, and then we can decide what kind of agency that woman has. Okay, so let's look at agency. Women perform 66% of the world's work. They produce 50%, but earn 10% of the income and own 1% of the property. Right? That's the reality of the world for women. Women who work full-time only own 77% of what men make, and 13% of women over 75 are poor, compared to 6% of men. Women are 70% of the world's poor. And remember something, whenever you put women, you add children, because children are in the place they're in, because women are in the place they're in. The lives of children will never improve till you improve the lives of their mother, which is why any movement that fights to better children's lives and is not feminist is doomed for failure, absolutely doomed for failure. Okay. And then, of course, when you get into race, it gets even worse. 26.5% of African-American women are poor, 23.6% of Hispanic women are poor, and you can see here. So again, when some white 40-something third waver gets up and screams about agency, I want to talk about this agency. This is where our feminism should be. And this is what we've lost in the third wave. So let's talk about how it plays out on the ground. Okay, so a little bit of advertising for my book. Right. Let me tell you about capitalism. I get 80 cents for every one sold, okay? So that tells you something like that. Right, now, just in case anyone thinks I'm getting rich on this. So when my book came out, okay, I have to say, it's been 2 years since it came out. And I wish I could write it again with the experiences of what happens when you put a book out. And what I just found out, I have to say, it was actually the Chinese rights have been bought. And it's been basically translated into Chinese. And I found out yesterday that in the Barnes & Noble of Taiwan, it's the book of the month in August. So that's great, yeah. So that's good news. So, okay, my book comes out, and I brace myself, because I know the feminist movement is going to come after me. It's going to go for the throat, okay? And indeed, I was not upset by that. I was not surprised by that. So I wanted to give you some of the criticisms I got from the third wave feminist movement to just show you how feminism has lost its way, okay? How mainstream feminism has lost its way. So in my book, what I do is I take a critical analysis using structural frameworks to really explain how pornography works. I look at it as an industry which interfaces with all other mainstream industries, which include the credit card companies, the bank companies, the hotel companies, the IT companies, the real estate companies. Pornography is not a fantasy. Fantasy happens in the head. Porn happens in the international banks of capital, okay? So first of all, it's not a fantasy. I also explore it as a discourse. What are the messages? What is the messages coming to men about sexuality, about masculinity, about femininity? What does it say about heterosexuality, connection, intimacy, all of those things? And I also look at it in terms of the men. Because we'll notice something else about third wave feminism. It's a feminism without men. They don't talk about men. They talk about women all the time, right? As if we're the only ones that matter. This is like, you know, talking about race and forgetting the fact that the whites are the racists, okay? So when I talk about feminism and pornography, I want to talk about men, because men make pornography, men get rich off pornography, men jerk off to pornography. It seems to me we should be talking about men when we talk about pornography, not women, okay? Except about the women's lives in it and how it impacts on them. So my book comes out, and Ms. Magazine, which is, you know, one of the biggest feminist magazines in America, tells me, right, that they don't have any room in their print copy to do a review of my book. The first anti-porn book by a feminist in 15 years, and Ms. Magazine's run out of any space. But they will give me the blog. And then, of course, who jumps in to do the blog but a woman called Shira Tarrant? Is anyone familiar with her? Okay, so Shira Tarrant is a very good example of third wave feminism. So what I'm going to do is sort of walk you through some of the criticisms of my book from her, because I think they really focus well on what's going on. So let's start with. So Shira Tarrant's first argument is that what I do is I leave no agency for the women in pornography. What I say is that they are victims of a predatory industry. I say that they get there through economic inequality, through racism, through sexual abuse. And then she takes me to task on this. So what she does is she quotes April Flores, who is herself in the porn industry. And she said, there is no doubt that porn is a very physical job. However, it is also a very individualized profession. Each performer is responsible for their own physical health. A performer always has the choice of not doing something they're not comfortable with. Right, so let's take this apart. Let's deconstruct. April Flores, when you interview April Flores, she's on the job. You understand this? This is how she makes the money. So supposing April Flores says, you know what? My God, GAIL DINES is right. Right? They treat us like pieces of shit. Or is she going to get a job the next day? Right? So first and foremost, never ask a woman in the sex industry to talk about the sex industry. There was a wonderful woman called Norma Hoatling. Did anyone know Norma? Wonderful woman who had been an exited woman from prostitution, and she started this organization called SAGE on the West Coast. And I heard her talk, and she said something profound. She said, never ask a woman who's been in the sex industry to talk about it until she's been out at least 5 years. She says, it takes that long to be able to figure out and process what happened to you. So meanwhile, April Flores, who I don't know anything about this woman's life, what I do know is she's in the industry. This is how she makes her money. What the hell is she going to say? So this is taken as criticism of me. Right? My analysis, based in the structural realities of the porn industry, is rendered invisible, and in its place we have one person saying it's individualized. This is like saying, you know, Karl Marx got it wrong. He really did. He doesn't realize that basically working for a factory is an individualized expression. How dare he make generalizations about alienated labor? Right? Did he interview every single worker to come up with this? So this is showing you how crazy all of this is, right? And then I argue, though, if you're going to talk about porn and women, I want to know, what about the men? Let's focus on the men a little bit, which not anywhere do third-wave feminists talk about, and certainly not in my review. So she's saying, April Flores, that basically you can do anything you want, you can say no, which of course we know is not true. Once you sign that contract and you get on that set, you are 18 years old, you come from the middle of America somewhere, you think you know what's going to happen to you on the set, you have no clue, you are 18, you are naked, you are surrounded by men, clothed, you have a camera up your vagina, one in your anus, you have 3 men sticking their penis in every orifice, calling you a bitch and a whore and a cunt. You tell me what power you have at that moment, because that's not what you were thinking you were going to happen. Nobody talks about that. What are you going to do? And I know from my interviews, because after I wrote that book, I got a ton of interviews from people in the porn industry to tell me what it's really like, And I got a director who called me up, who actually I interview in the book, and he recognized himself. And he said, you are completely right. I have left the industry. Don't feel sorry for the fucker who was there for 15 years, so he made a lot of money, but at least eventually he did get out, okay? And he said, I want you to know something. He said, everything you say in there is right. He said, and you know when I left? I left, he said, when every single time I went off to a photo shoot, and the producer, because he was a director, he said, and I would be leaving for a photo shoot, and the producer would call me, and he said his exact words to me, and I'm quoting now, were, wreck the bitch. Right? This is what he told me, wreck the bitch. So this is the reality of the industry. Okay, so let's think about what goes on for these women. And it says, this is a man called Jules Jordan, who is one of the most hardcore pornographers in the world. He himself has said, one of the things about today's porn and the extreme market, the gonzo market, so many fans want to see so much more extreme stuff. I'm always trying to figure out ways to do something different. So you understand this? They're running out of ideas. They don't know what to do, because they have created such a taste for violent porn. And these guys are big businessmen. Right? They do not want to break the law. You understand this? There's limits. They have to work within the limits of the law, because you have millions and millions at stake here. So they are now up against a wall. They have done everything they can to a woman's body, short of killing her, and they don't know what to do. So let's just talk about this and see what's next. So one of the big things in pornography, in fact, in all mainstream gonzo hardcore pornography, is gagging. This is where they put the penis so far down the throat, okay, that it actually activates the gag reflex. They also put a lot of mascara on her. So as her eyes water, you're watching it, because they like to see empirical proof that she's choking. I mean, she is choking. You hear the gagging. It makes you gag, okay? So this is every single gonzo film now, is her on a chair, usually with a head back, penis so far down. And as she's gagging, they're saying, look at me in the face. So she's gagging, she's looking up, and sometimes even worse, as I'm going to show. Now, let me take you to adult DVD. This is where the porn aficionados hang out. It is a discussion group. And they ask each other questions. So Hotboy 1999 puts the question forward on adult DVD, the chat, the porn chat. He says, I love the hardcore face fucking, the women drooling, the gagging and the puke scenes. And what he's asking his friends for is, can you give me some suggestions where I can go? No shortage of friends on this site, because in comes Panas, and he says, If you like roughest, it could be the Jessica scene. At one point, she stops the scene crying. If you like vomit, go for baby doll. So they give each other information, right? And what they'll say is at 3 minutes, 42 seconds, you'll see the gagging, the vomiting starting. And I went to this and baby doll, and sure enough, vomiting. And they keep it in. Vomiting, vomiting, vomiting. So this is the way they speak to each other. So again, let's think about Shira Tarrant interviewing one woman who says, you can do whatever you want and it's not that bad. And then these men know that's a piece of shit. They understand the level of violence. And when you read them, they get exactly what's happening to the women. So the other thing in porn, that's standard now, is anal sex. Now in porn, anal sex is rough, it's hard, it's painful, and its goal is to deliver to her the message, just what a filthy, stinking whore she is. That's the idea of anal sex. So you have things like altered asshole, anal suffering. Let me show you a promotional copy for this. This is a promotional copy for the film Anally Ripped Whores, right? And this is what it says. This is the promotional copy. We at Pure Filth know exactly what you want, and we're giving it to you. Chicks being ass-fucked till their sphincters are pink, puffy, and totally blown out. Adult diapers just might be in store for these whores when their work is done. Okay? So this is the empowering porn industry where women are making lots of choices to maximize their own rational well-being. This is the reality of the porn industry. When I argue with many women and men about porn, older men, they're not thinking this. They're thinking Playboy 10 years ago. Part of the problem is that this, for all of it being a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, is a stealth industry. Right? How many people really understand that this is mainstream? This is the major form of sex education in the world today for boys 12 and up. And girls. Less so for Gonzo. Girls don't go to Gonzo. We can talk about that later. But the statistics still show that girls are not going to Gonzo. Right? Gonzo, this level of hardcore is still male. Doesn't mean it won't change in a few years, but at this moment, when I interview the porn producers, they tell me this is mainly for men. Okay, that's what they say. Now, so let's go back to adult DVD talk and let's see what AC Cream has to say. And this is the kinds of things they post. The most real painful scene I've ever seen is Gangbang Auditions #3 from Diabolic. The scene with Aspen Brook. The guys start asking her questions like, you like that dick in your ass? But she's in such pain, her answers are hard to understand. She tried to say something like, I love it, but then the tears started flowing. A porn chick not handling dick gave me a major bone age, I recall. So, bone age, a boner, an erection. Okay, so let's think about then the reality. So again, you've got third-wave feminists wanting to talk about women and how empowered they are in pornography. And yet, did anyone here get a sense that this man, when he's watching it, thinking, oh my God, she's so empowered? Really, I had no idea women had such economic, social, and legal power. Who knew? Right? I mean, do you realise how ridiculous third-wave feminism is when you put it up against the empirical realities? Okay, so... And then listen, don't believe me. Go to the source itself. This is Adult Industry Medical Healthcare Association. This was the volunteer healthcare association of the porn industry. It's since got closed down for complex reasons. But during its time up, it had this up. It was where you went to get STD testing, etc. What it says here is it warns women in the porn industry what diseases to be careful of. So first of all, we know a major thing that happens to them is rectal prolapses. What happens regularly is because of the rough anal sex, your anus falls out and it needs to get sewn back up. Now, let me tell you something. Shira Tarrant came to hear me give a talk and then she tweeted. And you know what her tweet was? She said, just heard GAIL DINES talk. She said something like this, just heard GAIL DINES talk about anal prolapse or rectal prolapse. She says, and checked with a doctor, and he said it's not that serious, it's easy to do. Yeah, that's fine, no problem. Go, you know, have it sewn up, you're all fine. This talks about gonorrhea of the eye, chlamydia of the anus. You know, what happens? Every generation we have a group of women born who should have this happen to them. Okay, and the rest of us should think they're empowered through it. I mean, what kind of a feminism is this that this is how we live, that we live in this world comfortable in our elite status, and we let a whole bunch of women have to deal with this on their own. Now, also about race. Shira Tarrant criticises me because I argue, stupid me, that pornography is racist, both in its structure and its discourse. She says, surely there's racism in the porn industry. It affects how people of colour are represented and treated. But there are counter-stories. So me, unsophisticated, stupid me, I'm missing the counter-stories. So let's look at some of these counter-stories. Because she quotes Cinnamon Love, who then says Lexington Steele is doing some really interesting thing around this. So I'm thinking, okay, let's see what counter-stories Lexington Steele is coming out with. So I went on to Lexington Steele's pole position collection. Now, I didn't put the images up here because they're so violent, but this is the text. Wouldn't you love to be in the driver's seat while Lex unleashes his massive cock on hungry bitches? Get Lex's unique point of view as his whores kneel and spread to suck, fuck, and eat the last drop of cum from his huge cock. These are your counter stories, okay? Someone's going to have to explain to me afterwards how this is counter. Next one, his heavy metal collection. Lexington puts his metal to the test as he pushes ball deep into the industry's most renowned assholes. Will these porn stars sustain the damages as Lex's heavy cock rips them apart? Only the real stars will emerge from the ultimate anal test. So in Ms. Magazine, a feminist magazine, my book, Pornland, is being critiqued because I'm not talking about the counter stories of Lexington Steele. And then she goes on to say, next one. Then she goes on to say, Tarrant argues that GAIL DINES' generalizations about porn being racist and sexist is dangerous and responsible. So go back one. So he's not dangerous and irresponsible, right? No, not him. It's me, okay? I'm the one who's dangerous for women's health. And it's the same thing, by the way, when you talk about the so-called sex workers. It's not the Johns and the pimps, right? It's the radical feminists who are beating up on prostituted women. I bet you didn't know that, but we're the dangerous ones, okay? Next one. So Tarrant's critique of my book, I would argue, or all third wave, lacks an understanding of the historical roots of racism as a founding material and representational reality in the US. You will not understand this here in England the same way. Racism was a founding moment of every institution in the United States of America. And also, the nature of systematic racism that I discuss in my book is rendered invisible by the stories of a few individuals. Again, Martin Luther King having a discourse that talks about his experiences rather than a dream. So let's just talk about two other things now that's going on. Let's tell you how feminism has lost its way in the real world. Let's begin with this quote from a Toronto police officer who said that women should avoid dressing like sluts, okay? So what's the response to this? Okay, well, when I was a younger feminist, the response would have been, we march down there, right? And we basically, I remember Dworkin once said, if you don't like an institution, you dismantle it brick by brick, okay? Well, that's what we would have done and gone and fought. Not today, okay? We don't like what he said, so what do? We dress like this, okay? And then we reclaim our sluthood. This is what's going to work. This is going to overthrow patriarchy. Women walking around like this. Now, you know what? I want to say something. These, and the next picture, these are young women, okay? I understand that in the porn culture. My question is, where were the older feminists? This was an example of absolute and utter irresponsibility on the part of older feminists. To say to these younger women, we understand this energy, let's organise it, let's figure out a way how to do it. I'll give you an example. I was on the BBC World Service with one of the organisers. I'm not going to say her name. She's a young woman in her 20s. And we're on the BBC World Service, right? Thousands, if not millions of people listening to us. She is enraged at me. She said, how dare you come in and criticise us? If you don't like it, she said, start your own movement. And I said, no, listen. So I said, I did. It's called the feminist movement. And you're in my movement, honey. I'm not in yours, okay? Do you understand that? She walked into my movement and I said to her, what did you think? You were going to march into this movement, do what you want, and nobody was going to criticize you? I said, this is what movements do. Right? And I know we have the Norwegians here. They have the best way of organising a movement that I have ever seen, the way that you do. Because you wouldn't allow this shit to go down, okay? Am I right? Okay, yes. So I am saying we have to, you know, get in there. I'm not saying as older feminists we go in and we smack, smack, smack and say you can't do this. But you mentor. That's what you do. It means something, right? Our wisdom and our knowledge. When I was 22, I couldn't have done what I do now. So there's something to be said for wisdom, which doesn't mean we render invisible younger people. It means that we sort of build a movement together. So this is the result, okay? This is where it ends. It ends with women like this, dressing like this, basically reproducing it. So, carry on. So, this is Jacqueline Friedman, another third-wave feminism. Anyone heard of her in this country? A few. So she spoke at the Boston Slut Walk. 3,000 women, and this was her speech at the end. If you've ever been called a slut, stand up now and say together, I am a slut. Stand up and say it with me. I am a slut, I am a slut, I am a slut. All right, how did we get to this incredible point that this is feminism? I am a slut, okay? Now, let's imagine for a minute that we take Jacqueline Friedman's advice and that our future way to liberation is to claim that we're sluts. Just let's take that on face value. So I'm going to offer this woman her claim to this, okay? I'm going to say that her answer to her oppressed state, right, Miss Diallo, is to say she's a slut. So she should walk down the street claiming, I am a slut, I am a slut, I am a slut. Do you all know who she is? Yes. Right, because Miss Diallo is Dominic Strauss-Kahn's victim. Next one. Okay, so let's imagine this. The same time that the slut walks are going on, the head of the IMF, right, we're not talking any, you know, small job here, we're talking the head of the IMF, rapes a woman. Okay, rape, there's no question it was rape. His blood and her semen up the bathroom walls would be enough evidence for me, okay? Rapes her. And then, let's imagine she says, her defense, but I'm a slut. I'm empowered by it. Well, indeed, she didn't have to make that defense because the next week in the New York Post, this is what they say. DSK made a hooker. So you know what? If you're white, upper middle class, and older, maybe you can get away with this shit and saying I'm a slut. Let me tell you, if you're a woman of colour, if you're a poor white woman, that is going to stick like mud. So again, what does it mean for a major figure of third wave, Jacqueline Friedman, as the Dominic Strauss-Kahn is going on, to suggest that the answer is to claim one's sluthood? How elitist and privileged can you be to not understand the repercussions of what you're saying is going to have on other women? And now to the most awful thing in the thing, right? 50 Shades of Grey, okay? Right, I'm trying not to absolutely weep in the corner every time I see this book. So let's think about what this is, okay? 50 Shades of Grey has been described as a romantic love story, and I would add for the porn age. All right, so let's look at this romantic. Has anyone read it? All right, well, I'm going to introduce. Okay, I've saved you a lot of heartache because I'm going to tell you. So beyond boring, right? Okay, so let's talk about the romantic love story. Okay, so he gives her rules, a contract she has to sign, and in this contract he tells her that he demands absolute obedience, when she can sleep, when she can eat. She's not allowed to snack between meals unless he gives her the snacks. The clothes she wears, which he buys. Exercise, and he chooses the personal trainer. Okay? The hygiene and beauty, how to keep that going. Personal safety, joke, and personal quality. So he explains all of these things to her and gives her a list. And I'll give you an example of one of them. The obedience. This is on the contract. The submission will obey any instructions given by the dominant immediately without hesitation or reservation. The submissive will agree to any sexual activity deemed fit and pleasurable by the dominant, accepting those activities that are outlined in hard limits. She will do so eagerly and without hesitation. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea of Mr. Grey. I don't want you to think he's not a good guy. He's actually a prince because he's got very clear limits, and his limits are no fire play, no urination or defecation, no needles, knife piercing or blood, no gynecological medical instruments, no acts involving children, and no contact. You can't fault him. I mean, let's face it, right? This is a prince in the porn age, okay? Now, I did an interview a few weeks ago. I did an interview with a few women. And one of the things they said was it is a fairy story like Pretty Woman. Okay, so let's really talk about this. You've all seen Pretty Woman, okay? So have you ever thought for a minute, and I'm quoting my good friend here, Jane Caputi, have you ever thought for a minute how, you know, when there's a good film that comes out that makes tons of money, you get Batman 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, Die Hard 1, 2, 3, 4. Why was there no Pretty Woman Part 2? Have you ever thought about that? Really, think for a minute. Made a fortune. Why not? Well, let's imagine this. So they get married, the John and the prostitute, and they live happily ever after, except on their honeymoon, they have a bit of a fight. What's he going to turn around and say to her? You fucking whore. Right? You fight with me. You're going right back on the streets where I got you from. What happy ending do you know of a John who marries a prostituted woman? That's why there's no Pretty Woman Part 2. Although, as Jane Caputi so rightly points out, the film that Julia Roberts made after that actually was Pretty Woman Part 2. You know what it was called? Sleeping with the Enemy. Right? That's exactly what it would have looked like. Okay, now, signs of an abusive man. Jealousy, possessiveness, controlling, superiority complex, manipulative, whirlwind romancer, comes in, showers you off your feet, has mood swings, sexually abusive. Let me tell you, this, if you meet a man who's got one of these, it's dangerous. 2, beyond the pale. Every single one, lethal. This is the description of Mr. Grey. So in this love story, okay, of 50 Shades of Grey, let me tell you, 50 Shades of Grey 1, 2, 3. I'm going to write 50 Shades of Grey 4. You know what? At that point, she's running for her life to a battered women's shelter. Right? She's scarred all over from the wounds that aren't healing. She's got 2 traumatized, terrified children, and he would rather kill her than let her leave. And I have met women who have been on the run for 10, 15, 20 years from these men. So I think we should collectively write 50 Shades Part 4. Let real women know. So we have gotten to the point is how is it possible that women are buying into their own demise? My question is, are we, as a radical feminist movement, becoming a movement without a constituency? Has our constituency gone to the other side? Have they been so completely colonized that they will buy into their own demise to such a degree as they're buying 50 Shades of Grey? This is a terrible, terrible moment in history. Right, you understand what this says. I can tolerate fighting the porn industry and lots of things because a lot of it's going up against men. I can tolerate that. When I see women doing this, there is a level of despair that we can't give into, I need to make clear, but it is terrible. So the answer, of course, is a feminist movement. Now this is from Details, and this is, actually I think this is Maxim, and they're saying you start from here and you end here. Well, what we say is you start here and you end there. Without the cigarette. Now, we have got to figure out a way. We have got to figure out a way that we take the brilliant insights of radical feminism and that we make them applicable and real to our younger women. And I have to say, Sheila's book on beauty and misogyny, when I use that in my classes, and I use it every semester, and I tell this story, that in my advanced feminist theories class, my students read a book, and then the next week they have to write a paper on it. When they read beauty and misogyny, they can't write the paper. They need 2 weeks, because it is so profound for them. It upends their world, right, in a way that we need to take this kind of stuff and spread it around. We need to figure out, we cannot let the third wave argue it is a generational issue. You understand? That will kill us, because then we all look old, history and dinosaurs. We are not a generational issue. We are absolutely an ideological issue. So how do we do this? Gramsci said, you need pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. which means be realistic what you're up against, right? But always be optimism of the will. Remember that change is always possible. But change and my optimism of the will is collective agency. You want to talk about agency, fine, but it's collective agency. It's women as a group, as a class, respecting and fighting for those that are more oppressed than us, like women of colour, poor white women. We must always remember that there's got to be a really nuanced way of bringing women together as a group. But our optimism of our will has to be collective agency. We have to turn to each other and understand and say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm actually doing okay out of this system, but you're not. And you know what? I will fight to the death till you're okay. Because it's not about me, it's about you. This is the key to feminism. And we have, as I said in my last lecture here, I said, you know what? Somehow the feminist movement is run by women who are actually 14-year-old boys with hard-ons, because all they talk about is sex. Sex, 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 right? Who else talks about sex? A 14-year-old boy with a hard-on, right? We've got other things to do. You know, orgasms are very nice, but revolutions are better, right? They really, really are. So, what I want to say... One optimism of the will is stoppornculture.org. There are groups who are going to start Stop Porn Culture here in the UK. We have them all over the United States of America. They're talking about starting it in Norway. I'm going to Iceland in October to meet with the government and the Icelandic feminists. They're going to start it there. We're talking about Stop Porn Culture in Australia. We need a movement. This should be one of many, not the only one. But what I have to say, in these times when we have the 50 Shades of Grey, we have the slut walks, we have women calling themselves feminists who are actually pornographers, it is very, very easy to absolutely seep into despair. But if we seep into despair, we do the devil's work. You understand that? You do the work of your enemies. Someone once said to me on a radio show, they said to me, Gail Dines, he said, aren't you pushing a boulder up a hill? And I said, yes, of course I'm pushing a boulder up a hill. That's what you do to make the world livable. You push boulders up hills. The labour movement pushed the boulder up the hill. The women's movement pushed boulders up hills. Civil rights movement pushed boulders up hills. That's the way you do it. What choice do we have? But you know what? I alone and you alone can't push that boulder up that hill. But together, just think what we can do. So please, let's think about how we revitalise this movement and how we stop this kind of fun feminism, okay? And we get out, because remember, the fun feminists are a small percentage. We shouldn't get too focused on them. Because when you go out into the real world and you speak to real women, they're not talking about fun feminism. They're talking about how they're going to feed their children. They're talking about how they're going to deal with this man who is undermining their ability to parent their children in ways they want to. Some of them are running away from battery. These are our constituents. And unless we keep our eyes on that and take our eyes off what I often call white noise, right? The pro-porn feminists, they're white noise. And our job is to stay focused on who these women are. That is what the feminist movement was always should be about. That is our future. It is our past, and it is now our future. Thank you.